and welcome. In this video, we are going to look at constructor and setter injection. The first method that I'm going to show you is constructor injection. Dependency injection in general is used when a class has a dependency on another class. In the previous video, we built a very simple app with a couple of classes, simple service and simple repository. We marked each of these classes as a bean using @service and @repository annotations, and now I'm going to show you how you can use constructor injection to pass one bean into another. Let's say the simple service class has a dependency on the simple repository class, meaning that it requires an instance of the simple repository class. To show you how constructor injection is done, I'm going to simply modify the definition of the simple service constructor and pass in an instance of the simple repository class as an argument. So let's add that in. Let's add a simple repository instance. Oops. And to make sure that this instance is not null, what's being passed in is not null, I'm just going to print it. So I'm going to put a print statement here and print that object. So if it's null, it's going to just print null, and if it's not, it's going to print the address of that object. So let's stop and rerun the app and see if the beans get created. So you can again see that both beans got created without a problem. So that means that somehow Spring was able to find that instance, the singleton instance of simple repository, and pass it in. That's the beauty of Spring context and the Spring container. Constructor injection here was all taken care of without us having to do anything else. All I had to do was change the definition of the constructor of simple service and have it require an instance of the simple repository as an argument. So how did this happen? Why did this happen? This happened because the simple service class is marked as a bean and simple repository class also is marked as a bean. So if you look at the simple repository class, we had this @repository annotation, which means at the startup of your app, Spring will create an instance of each class, will create a bean, and it will save it in the Spring context. From that point on, whenever you require to use an instance of any of these classes, Spring can fetch it for you and inject the dependency where you need it. So since this simple repository is a bean and it's a singleton bean, meaning that there's only one copy of it existing, Spring was able to go in the Spring context, look for this bean, fetch it, and inject it here where we need it. That's all you have to do for constructor injection. That's it. You just have to pass in the bean that you require as a dependency into the constructor, and you just have to make sure that that class is defined as a bean. So either it has an annotation that marks it as a bean, or if you're using a configuration file, make sure you have a bean definition for this class. So that's it. That's constructor injection. Now let's move on to setter injection. So let's say instead of injecting the dependency into the constructor, I want to use a setter. So let's remove this and this print statement and add a field of type simple repository. So let's say I have a field here of type simple repository, and I'm going to define a setter. Set simple repository, which takes a simple repository instance as an argument and sets this simple repository to whatever you pass in. Also, let's add a print statement here so that we can see the value of the simple repository instance coming in. So let me just add a print statement here. and print the simple repository. So if it's null, it will print null, and if not, it will print the address. Now, let's rerun our app and see what happens. So I see that the repository bean was created and the service bean was created, and that's it. It moved on to the hello world, which was the print statement in my main method. So it actually never got to this print statement over here, meaning that this method was never actually called. So in order for setter injection to work, you actually need to use another annotation called autowired. So autowired, it is an annotation that you use to fetch a bean. So if simple repository has already been marked as a bean, using an annotation, in this case at repository, in order for you to fetch it, you need to use this annotation autowired. Autowired forces Spring to go search for a bean of this type in the Spring context, and if it can find one, it will inject it here. Now, that was not necessary in the case of constructor injection. Constructor injection is an exception. The injection happens without using autowired. But if you're trying to inject anywhere else, you need to use autowired so that Spring can go and fetch a bean of this type for you. So now if we rerun the app, it should inject the simple repository bean here, and therefore we should get to this print statement over here. And it did. And you can see this print statement here. It printed the address of the simple repository object. So that's setter injection. In order to inject into a setter, you pass in the dependency as an argument, and then you annotate it with autowired so the Spring can go and fetch a bean of this type. So there you have it. That was setter injection. In this video, we looked at constructor and setter injection. In the next video, we will talk about what's called field injection. I hope you found this video useful. I will see you next time. Thank you.